Kia ora and welcome to Cinema in Context, where we discuss all things film and the connections between. My name is Jeremy Downing.
I'm William Chen.
And I'm Sarah Watt.
And each month at Cinema in Context, we discuss two films, one current and one retrospective, with some connection. It could be the same director, the same actor, or a similar theme. This month, we are discussing In the Mood for Love, which came out in 2000, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the latest Marvel offering, which came out this year. The connection being, and we haven't done the same actor in a long time, but the connection is the same actor, Tony Leung. So, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to give us a bit of a summary of the 2000 Criterion Collection film, In the Mood for Love. Sarah.
Thank you, Jeremy. So, back in 2000, Hong Kong director Wong Kar-wai made a film that changed not just the course of his career, but the course of, broadly speaking, Asian cinema, with In the Mood for Love. Now, In the Mood for Love is an exquisitely, beautifully aesthetic, gorgeous sounding, gorgeous looking, gorgeously romantic film. It stars Tony Leung, Chi Wai, and Maggie Cheung as So. Now listen carefully, dear listeners. Maggie Cheung lives with her husband in a small room, like a small apartment, next door to Tony Leung, who lives in his small apartment room with his wife. However, his wife and her husband are off having an affair. And so this brings Maggie and Tony close together in an unexpected relationship.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And William, give us a bit of an overview of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Alrighty, so Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is the latest offering in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being the 25th film and one of the earlier films in their Phase 4. It stars Simu as the titular Shang-Chi, as he discovers that there's something. Oh gosh, what happened in this movie again?
You know, we're keeping this in. We're keeping this in with you.
Okay, so
should we workshop it? Should we workshop it together?
Okay.
There's a magical island where there's Pokemon. We know that. There is 10 rings that Sarah has rightly said are actually more like bracelets.
Bracelets. That's right.
And we've got Awkwafina just doing what Awkwafina does best.
That's right.
The best friend, hanger on. She's exquisite.
And yeah, I mean, his dad, Shang-Chi's dad, is a bad dude that has apparently done horrible, horrible things through his past. And
How long
yet,
does that past go back, William? Can you tell us?
Thousands and thousands of
Thousands
years.
Wow.
Yes.
That's not really explained. Like, is it the power of the rings?
Yeah, the power of the rings makes him immortal and gives him all sorts of Iron Man powers as well. But basically, I apologize, ladies and gents. So Shang-Chi, or Sean, as he calls himself when he flees to America, finds out more about his past as he pursues his dad into mystical, trans-dimensional spaces to fight a cosmic evil.
Nice. That's a good encapsulation of something that I didn't quite understand.
I love it. Team, those of you listening, it's worth saying that we are recording this episode remotely. We are still in lockdown here in Auckland, New Zealand, which means that Sarah, William, and I are unable to meet in person. However, we have a plan to do our end of year recording together because we should be able to by that point. And we've already planned to do it with some wine and nibbles. And it'll be really nice to be together in the same space. So look forward to that. But until then, we're recording through the interwebs. And the last thing I'll say at this point before diving into our discussion is we will be discussing both films in detail and with spoilers. So if you haven't seen either film, I would suggest pausing this episode and coming back to it at a future date. All right, team, who would like to jump in and with which film?
All right, I think it's really, really interesting that we had Tony Leung as the connective tissue of these two movies this time round, because so much of, in my opinion, what makes Shang-Chi tick is his character, right? I know the film isn't ostensibly about him. It's about his son and kind of Shang-Chi's own hero's journey as he discovers who he is and fulfills his potential. But really, I mean, completely agree with the critics on this one. Like, Tony Leung is who makes this movie tick, right? He is probably one of the better Marvel villains in the franchise that has had historically a really huge villain problem. They usually do like good origin stories, and each of the heroes within the MCU have the thing that makes them who they are. But the villains are usually really boring and one note, and it either comes in, the Loki flavor where he just wants to create chaos and destruction, or the sad sack, oh man, I was wronged in the past and I'm kind of a good guy until I'm not, such as in movies like Black Panther. And I find Tony Leung's performance and how the character is written, his character of Wen is such a breath of fresh air. The ending is a little iffy, but even with that being said, I think he's a great actor casting a great role, and it really elevates the movie for me.
That's so interesting, William, that you say that typically it's I've been wronged in the past, but I'm actually a good guy, because I feel as though that is him, that his backstory, and do correct me if I'm wrong, because, it's not the most complicated plot, but I am usually a bit more challenged by these films, aren't I? But, he was a good guy, wasn't he? He fell in love, he got a wife, he made some children, and it wasn't until she was taken from him that he turned all sort of bitter and avenging. And so, I don't know. I felt like he was. I thought he was relatively nuanced in terms of being relatively loving towards his kids, but only as long as they were helping to avenge the what he thinks is kidnapping, doesn't he, more than murder of his wife. But isn't that the same? Isn't that the same as all of them?
I think what made a difference for me was the fact that he has his redemption at the beginning of the movie, right? Because he starts off as this immortal warlord that's done all this crazy evil stuff. But then when he meets his wife, he has the redemption. He
retires.
He retires. He becomes mortal. He puts away the 10 rings / bracelets for good. And it's only after she dies that he reverts to his old ways. And so there's a sense of tragedy about that, because he had all of that stuff figured out until it was torn away from him. And so that, when he does have the final confrontation with Shang-Chi at the end, you see where he's coming from. You see he's delusional, but it's also not usually like one of the Marvel plots, because, Tony Stark didn't respect me, so I'm going to create an army to destroy the world, that kind of thing. I think it's very smart what this movie does in keeping it very, very personal until the very end, where the dragons come out and the CGI gets really bad. It's all personal. He is only there to save his wife, or at least he thinks he's there to save his wife, and no one will stand in his way. Whereas so many other Marvel movies are about the world domination or making $1 billion, or these really, really, I would say, weakly written aspirations. And even with Black Panther, Killmonger, Michael B. Jordan's character was really held up on a pedestal as someone who was really nuanced and who the audience could associate with and identify with. But I feel like his turn in Black Panther was so dramatically, theatrically evil that it just takes so much away from what he actually becomes by the end of the film. Whereas Tony Leung's character, you can still see the spark of humanity that, was in him from the beginning of this movie, where he does have his redemption arc.
I love this connection you're making, William, or this critique, I guess, of the Marvel universe. I love the Michael B. Jordan character in Black Panther, and I think I mentioned before my biggest bugbear with that film is that he dies at the end of the film. I would have really liked to have seen him survive and continue. Who knows? He might come back for the second one. And I agree with you. The villains are pretty lackluster across the board. However, I will say that the main villain, Thanos, his outing in Avengers Infinity War is, I think, fantastic.
Agreed.
It's an ensemble film, but really that's his movie. He is the central character of that film, and I think that is one of the better, in fact, one of the best Marvel movies that have come out.
It's his hero's journey, which is what's so great about Infinity War.
Yeah, and I will agree with you. Like the CGI, there's some really patchy CGI in this film. I would say it happens much earlier than the final
Right
sequence.
at the end,
There's some
yeah.
trees, if I remember correctly. I was like, oh, I turned to my boyfriend in his flatmate. I was like, this is some shoddy CGI here. But I tell you what, when those dragons came out, or when the dragon came out of the water, I was all about it. I was like,
Oh,
yeah.
really?
I think like by that point, by the time they get to the magical Pokemon place,
Yeah.
I was like, cool, this is all I want from this movie. You start off with like a speed sequence on a bus. You end up on like a Skyfall sequence on the side of some scaffolding on a building, and then all of a sudden you're into Godzilla versus Kong territory. And so by that point, I was like, you can do what you like, movie. I'm here for the pretty pictures.
So I'm guessing that, not just because we haven't been able to get into the cinemas, but because this is on Disney Plus, we will have watched this on smaller screens than. So if I had watched this in the VMAX on big recliner seats, then I might have found it all. I remember when the trailer came out, I was genuinely excited, and I was like, "That looks like it's going to be freaking cool! I can't wait." But then watching it on a reasonable, not massive size telly. It didn't quite have the same effect for me. So by the end, when the dragons are doing all their thing and everyone's doing their fighting and and it no longer has the sort of thrill or panache of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon or Hero from back in the day. It was really like all these films go all the time. I wasn't into it by then. I don't think it's a bad film, but I'm just saying I wasn't into it by then.
I like the point you make, Sarah, and I would kind of agree with that. I think the final set piece is, I think it's technically competent, but watching it on a small screen it felt really disorienting and kind of cheap. Like, I don't know, it felt like it maybe could have done with a couple more passes of rendering. The dragons themselves, I think their designs were fine and all that. I think, Jeremy, my main disappointment was the resolution of Shang-Chi and his dad. Like, their arc was really well done, and it ended with a pretty kick-ass fight where they're kind of trying to share the rings, and it's this big metaphor of passing power from father to son and all that, and then it turns into a dragon fight, and you're like, oh, come on.
Yeah, fair enough. But I agree with you that interchange with the rings and the color, the way they use color in this film is really well done. You know exactly who you should be rooting for based on which color their weapons are, and the same with the rings. I fully agree. It was messy. There's lots of things in this movie that just appear. Like, I think the sister character is very strange. She's not very well crafted, and I also think the Michelle Yeoh character, she sort of just turns out of nowhere as like an exposition machine.
She has so much exposition, so much.
Do you feel like she's sort of an in-joke?
Possibly, or maybe just because she's
bring Michelle Yeoh back a little bit like they did in Gunpowder Milkshake.
I mean, she's just a really well-known, Asian martial artist. I guess that's the thing. And it's, oh, come on, such a pity to cast Michelle Yeoh and not to do anything with her. She gets a couple of training scenes with Xiang, and then she doesn't really get to participate in the final battle in any cool way. And you're right, Jeremy. Like, her purpose is just to spout exposition. Same with Ben Kingsley. Like, I was so happy that he was back from Iron Man 3 because I don't know about you guys.
Yes,
I love Iron Man 3. I love that movie.
Yeah, me too.
And he's okay. I mean, he's secondary comic relief after Awkwafina, but for most of the climax, his role is just exposition machine. Like, every second word out of his mouth is explaining what's going to happen in the final act, and it felt kind of a waste of Ben Kingsley talents because from what he has, he's really good.
So I read that the director, Destin Daniel Cretton, who also co-wrote the script. So I read that he wanted to take this opportunity to bring Ben Kingsley's, is it Trevor Slattery? What a great name. Back from Iron Man 3 because of the 2013 film that was kind of problematic in its depiction of the Mandarin, or the person impersonating the Mandarin. And so it brought him back so that there was a great opportunity for the Trevor Slattery character to sort of I guess sort of apologize, or at least sort of explain why he was like he was back in the 2013 film and kind of mitigate somewhat for what we would now definitely 8 years on consider to be racist. Does that ring true?
I got that quite clearly from the intention of this movie, and I appreciated it. I do agree with William though as well that he at the end of the film it reminds me of some of the later Peter Jackson films, particularly the Hobbit movies, where they use characters like this and sort of intercut clearly filmed in pickups ways just to kind of bolster and fill in the gaps. But it was still a thrill seeing him, and that callback to that character. I never expected to see that character show up again. Yeah. And what a wonderful way to do it.
Yes, open into the cave, and who's this guy? And look, and his accent. I mean, the slightly Liverpudlian, even though he's carrying around that ridiculous piece of fur. What's it called? His that creature that he talks to.
Mitchell, was that its name?
Something like that. That was actually very funny. And when they're driving in the forest and everything, I think his comic delivery is, oh my gosh, Ben Kingsley's just priceless.
And the design of those Pokemon is fantastic. They are so cute. Oh my gosh, gonna sell so many plushies. And then when they get to Taoluo, where you see actual Pokemon like Alola Ninetales, basically it's really cool because I mean they're recognizably creatures from Chinese folklore and myth, but done with Marvel budget, and you're like, wow, this is actually visually quite spectacular. It's just by the end of it, it gets a little messy.
I should just like to make a quick note to our listeners that when we chose these two films, we hadn't actually necessarily watched both of them. And so we went with the Tony Leung connection. But I think what's always fun about this podcast work, right, is watching one of the films and then watching the other and drawing the connections out of them. And I think we picked two films that are very, very different in genre. We've got the 2000 made but 1960s set Hong Kong melodrama versus this historical futuristic Avengers Marvel film. And yet, isn't it interesting, the points of similarity? And I just wanted to say that to me, Ben Kingsley's Trevor Slattery is the comic relief, obviously, in Shang-Chi, although I adore Awkwafina. In The Mood for Love, which is not a funny film at all, guys, because it's about love.
Hang on, Sarah. I think it's pretty funny. I was shocked at how funny it was.
What, In the Mood for Love? Are you talking about though with the oafish character who?
No, I'm just thinking of the little interstitial like dialogue bits, and it's really charming because of how comfortable both the leads are in their characters. Since I mean Maggie Cheung and Tony Leung have worked in so many things together. Yeah. The chemistry comes off as so genuine and so warm. And like there were parts of that movie where I laughed out loud, and I for sure did not laugh out loud during Shang-Chi. Like I thought it was fine, but it wasn't funny like I found In the Mood for Love to be.
Oh wow, okay. Jeremy, did you find In the Mood for Love funny?
I can't say laughing or humor was the prevailing response.
Emotion.
But I was going to say earlier when we were talking about how Shang-Chi is in the Legend of the Ten Rings, how it's visually stunning with the messy end. I mean, I was going to segue at that point as well, Sarah, because I feel the same about In the Mood for Love. It's a beautiful film with a really strong first hour that just sort of like what the actual happens at the end. And I read afterwards about how the filmmaker made this film, without a script and sort of exploring it. It felt very David Lynchian, actually. It reminded me a lot of Lynch in the way that it moved. Was it funny? I wouldn't say that, but I absolutely agree that the romance was palpable. What a wonderful romance. And the performances of Tony Leung and Maggie, is it Cho?
It's Xiang. I mean, in Mandarin, it's Zhang, but of course, this is the Cantonese pronunciation. So, Chong.
Chong. Is just spectacular. And the emotion that the two of them are able to communicate through just kind of brooding looks. And the director really gives their face the screen, It's quite spectacular. And I was sitting there going, I know Maggie Cheong's face from somewhere very well. What movie? What movie? What movie? And of course, it's Hero, which
Yes.
Tony Leung
Yeah.
is in as well.
Yeah.
And I think
And they play lovers in Hero as well. Like it's
yeah, it's like a hark back to this
Yeah.
film, I'm sure. And I loved that movie when it came out, and I still love it, but I haven't seen it in a long time.
Mm.
And I think that we probably, we said in our chat that it made more sense to pair Ten Rings with Hero, but I still love that we've connected it to In the Mood for Love, because we'll probably talk about Hero anyway, because the love in this is spectacular. And there's a core of Ten Rings that is a love story as well with Tony Leung's character. So
Well, also though, what about Sean and Awkwafina? Lily?
Katie.
What about Sean and Katie? You see, I was thinking they clearly have witty repartee, and she's on board with the whole thing. And at the end, they link arms and walk through the fiery Benedict Wong's fiery ring entrance thing, and they're not, and their relationship is not consummated, and there is just kind of like this lovely, tantalizing, gosh, these guys would make such a cute couple, right? Which is sort of the same but different with Maggie and Tony in The Mood for Love.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also an unconsummated romance where, gee, these two would make such a cute couple,
Is it unconsummated? I couldn't figure out. What was the sequence where she was hiding in his room? Like, what had they been doing there?
They'd been hanging out, but that was because of the gossip.
They've been eating noodles. There's so much food scenes, so many food scenes in The Mood for Love, and I love it for that. It made me really hungry for wonton noodle soup. But yeah, they've been eating noodles. She was helping him write his manuscript.
They've just been hanging out, Jeremy.
Hanging out.
But what about the sequence where he has his own house somewhere else, and then she's umming and ahhing, and then she does decide to go?
Well, I mean, obviously they love each other, but she just goes to visit with him. But no, the whole point is she says throughout the film, we are not going to stoop to the depths of our horrible husband and wife partners who are off shagging each other and having this affair. We're not going to be like them. She says it so many times. And so I've read stuff that says we don't know if their affair was consummated, and I feel very strongly we totally do. And that's the whole beautiful loss that Tony's character is experiencing by the end of the film. And when the titles go up at the end and it says he just has to carry through the rest of his life this sense of a time and a feeling, and it just feels like not unrequited love, unrealized love.
I do think that the reserved nature of this film is one of its absolute strengths, and how it doesn't show. It's far more sensual to suggest these things on a visual medium than if we just saw, semi-naked or naked actors simulating sex, which I did read that they did film those sort of scenes, but they decided together to pare it back, and I really appreciate that.
They created a whole different film. Jeremy, you're right. The whole film originally, and you're quite right in saying that it was improvised because there was no script. Yes, initially they were shooting it in a really sexy, naughty sort of way. That's the quote that Tony says in the special features on the Criterion Blu-ray. But, and then they actually decided, and so we do get to see them smile at each other, and they're beguiling, and they're cutesy, and they're touching each other more and all that. But that doesn't wind up in the actual film, hey?
Yeah, it made me think, though, of an older time. It's set in the 60s, and I thought if this film was made back in the 50s or 60s, then it would absolutely be a stand-in for they have consummated this relationship. I guess it's just a sign of the times that it was made in the 90s, where you could show a lot more. But I would still say there's an ambiguity there, Sarah. I know you feel strongly that it's very clear. I don't think it matters either way. Like, the point is that there's a love there that goes, just deeper than just sex. But I think there's space there to read it either way.
There is space, but one of the readings that I've done does say that it is likened to is it David Lean's Brief Encounter, and Brief Encounter obviously is definitely from the olden days, made in the olden days, about the couple who meet on the train station platform and who have a sort of an emotional affair, if you will, and there is absolutely no consummation in that. and then go their separate ways, and there's this lifetime of longing sort of thing. So that's why but also I stick to the reading of it not being consummated, simply because it makes it so much more interesting, because we're used to seeing films where two people are thrown together or come together or whatever, and they do consummate their relationship, and it's like, so that's fine, but we've seen that a million times. Imagine how much more palpably powerful it is to go, we are desperately in love with one another and we are not going down that particular road together. You know what I mean? It's so much more heightened.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's shorthand, isn't it? You know, sex is shorthand for they're in love, and it's when films do the work of an actual love story. You know, I feel the same about A Star Is Born as well, how they really built that love together, and it's absolutely the same with this one. You feel the love that they have in a way that if they just kind of hop into bed together, it doesn't have the same impact, because we have not been brought along for the journey.
I could say way more, so I will, because it was a pause and I'm going to take it. Because also, I think what is so lovely about In the Mood for Love is the way that they play the roles of each other's absent partners, initially at least. You know, there's that real sadness of I think it's the first meal they go out together, and they're like, well, what would your husband eat and what would your wife eat? And then they eat those meals that the other's person's partner would do. And it's like, we're here to fill a gap in one another's lives initially, because as I keep saying, our horrible partners are off shagging each other in Japan. And so that's a really unusual and quite touching way to start an affair. You know, you normally start an affair not by evoking the person that you're ostensibly cheating on or falling out of love with. And then when they do that wonderful scene where she practices saying to her husband, and has Tony Leung's character as the stand-in, and she practices saying to him, "Are you having an affair?" And they role play it, and she gets dreadfully upset and all that. It's like, wow, that's amazing, I think.
Can we quickly talk about how the two scenes you brought up, Sarah, are constructed? Because I found it. I mean, this movie is basically, it's a film school study, right? Yeah. It's a movie made in 1999, 2000 that's set up and structured in such a different way from its contemporaries. And I guess what the point I was making before about it being funny, I think comes from a lot of these structural flourishes. For example, when they share their meal together and ask for what your spouse would have ordered, to try and understand why their own spouse would go off to have an affair, you end up seeing that the two meals that they delivered are exactly the same, just with different condiments, which tells you so much about why maybe this affair started in the first place and how mundane it would be compared to the growing attraction between our two characters.
Do you mean the affair between the absent husband and wife is that they would both eat steak with blur sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly, with mustard and what looks like hot sauce or ketchup. It's such a fantastic character detail. I also love that you never ever see the faces of the other husband and other wife, because it's so not their movie. Yeah, and it shouldn't be their movie. And then, of course, when they do the role play, because the film has sort of conditioned you at that point to see a faceless person as the cheating spouse. When you see Maggie Cheung talk to a silhouetted man, you think that it's actually her husband. Yes. And then she slaps, and it's a very half-hearted acting slap. And then you see the reverse shot of Tony Leung, and it's so charming and so surprising. Like it keeps pulling the rug out from under the audience's feet, and that just keeps continuing on and on until we get to the ending, which, as you say, Jeremy, kind of becomes a very, very different thing.
The ending,
just the sequence in Uncle Wat. I was like, what the? Why are we in Cambodia? What? And I'd say, I enjoyed it because I've been in Angkor Wat and I've been to those places, and the beautiful shots of the camera at the end moving, tracking, and you're seeing the roof. I don't think you see that now because there's sort of bat cages or bat protectors all put up. But I just was like, I don't get it, and I don't really want to get it because it's the end of the movie and it's a flourish about him speaking a secret into a hole in the wall and putting. I was just like, why are we in Cambodia? What's that?
You got that was a reference to the tree that he mentioned earlier in the film?
Yeah,
I
but
didn't.
why?
My husband
Why?
reminded me.
Oh, yeah, I picked that up, and I was just
Oh.
like, why are we in Cambodia? Like, there was been no mention of Cambodia. Like, sure, he might have gone there for work, but thematically,
Yeah, I know.
it was just because you just wanted to film the temples.
Maybe. I mean, this movie apparently was a huge boon to the Cambodian tourism industry. Like, everyone wanted to go to Angkor Wat and find a secret hole afterwards.
Mm. Do you know what the ending reminds me of? Now you mention it, is the credit cookies in Shang-Chi. Here's another connection from Sarah, because if you recall, there is the mid-credits cookie, and then there's the end credits cookie in Shang-Chi, and in this one, you could say that those rather extended scenes, those kind of after the intertitles, maybe they're like a series of credit cookies. No, they're not. They're not, don't worry.
What were the credit cookies? I'm sure I saw one of the credit cookies. I don't know if I lasted to the end of the credits.
Okay.
What were the ones in Shang-Chi and the Legend of I forget the name of this movie. 7 rings, 10 rings?
10 rings, 10 rings. He has 5 on each arm. The first credit cookie is Xiang and Katie go through Benedict Wong's fiery ring of death, or what do you call it, Sarah? Anyway, they go through and they meet Benedict Wong. I thought Doctor Strange was going to appear, but instead we get Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner and Brie Larson as Captain Marvel.
Oh,
Which
that's
is
right.
So weird, because who cares?
And
again, so zoomed in.
I mean, they are literally phoning it in, literally phoning it in. And it's like, why do we care? I don't want this movie to link up to the event. Anyway. Everything's really wooden and robotic, and it's like, oh great, Shang-Chi's he's gonna be in the Avengers. And then the final credit cookie is more fun. It shows it's the sister. I can't remember her character name, but she is now in charge of the Ten Rings, organization, and she's now made it not just a club for boys, because there's a whole bunch of female assassins training with the male assassins as well. And then it zooms out and you see the whole compound's been this big makeover, and there's graffiti on the wall, and she's brought it into the 21st century. So I think that's a much better ending for the movie.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
I didn't see that credit cookie.
Oh, really? That's at the very, very end of the credits.
Lena and Shawn are in the bar.
Oh, no.
Oh.
At the very end. You have to gird your loins for these Marvel credits.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a third cookie?
No,
Yeah.
there's 2.
No, but wait. What was the one then with them being in the bar and they're talking?
Oh, that's the first credit cookie, because then Benedict Wong comes in with his ring of fire and they leave the bar.
Oh, yeah. And then they go and see Brie Larson and Mark Ruffalo.
That's the end of the movie. That's the final scene of the film, isn't it?
No. The final scene of the film is after the dragon fight, and they're like, yeah, we won. And then credits, directed by Destin Daniel.
And that song.
I don't think so. I don't think so. It doesn't cut to them telling the story with them. I remember that hard cut being like, oh, that's quite cool. Like it's domesticated.
Oh, really?
This whole. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Alrighty.
Well, there you go.
I guess, dear listeners, let us know who's right in this. Very
let
important
us know what
debate.
this film was like. Yes. Hey, it's worth saying that Destin Daniel Cretton is the director of. I saw one of I don't know how many shorts he had made by the time Short Term 12 came out.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? 10, 11 years ago.
That was what, 2012? 11, 12? Yeah.
It might have been. So Short Term 12, actually, the feature of it, fantastic film that he directed about disenfranchised youth. Hey, and terrific. There's amazing rap in it, and it's the dude from Get Out.
Is it Lakeith Stanfield? Right?
Yes. So it's one of the early, or if not the first, breakouts of Lakeith Stanfield.
Wait. Is this why Brie Larson is in the end credits stinger? Because she was the star of Short Term 12.
Yes, she was.
Connections.
There's another connection. Good point. So, good point. So yes, anyway, so he made Short Term 12, which is a terrific film, and everyone should see it, particularly you, Jeremy. And there you go.
Yeah,
nice.
I have to check it out. It's awesome. I think it's so interesting that Marvel are hedging their bets on these indie directors and giving them huge multi-million budget blockbusters based on the MCU. I think I'm super keen to see what Chloe Zhao does with Eternals. I know it's been getting pretty savage with the reviews, but man, just what a fascinating experiment.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that. And there's a narrative there about, there's a potential that it is just an average movie, but I also have seen the narrative about the type of movie that she's made. And like, I guess you mentioned misogynistic earlier, William, and the general fandom of Marvel. So it's going to be interesting to see. Can we talk about Awkwafina? Because I think she is spectacular always. I watched The Farewell about this time last year, and my goodness, what a wonderful, wonderful film. What a brilliant performance. And for all of her sidekickiness in this, I do want to shout out our lead as well. Is it Simu Liu? Is that his name?
Yeah.
I think the two of them together, I would happily watch another one of these movies with the two of them at the front. Just a great chemistry, great casting, and dragons flying around in Awkwafina's voice. I couldn't help but think of Raya and the Last Dragon, which also came out this year.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that what struck me most about their chemistry was how unforced and how natural it was. Like they seemed like real friends who had known each other for a decade. And a lot of it, I mean, even with all the punch-ups around like Awkwafina's dialogue, it felt like a real person like cracking jokes, which is not always what you get with the quippy, Marvel dialogue. And like, have either of you like really gotten into Kim's Convenience?
No.
Because like Simu Liu, like he's a really funny guy, and I think a lot of that rubs off on this movie. Just naturally very charming, very, very laid back, kind of cool without wanting to be cool, but also on the flip side having kind of that everyman quality. Because I don't think he's he's obviously jacked for the role, but he's not huge like Chris Evans, or
apparently he put on 4.5 kilograms of muscle.
Wow.
That's what I read. Apparently he already knows how to do 3 types of martial arts, and he learned 8 more.
Yeah, because he used to be a stuntman. Like he did a lot of stunt work back in the day. I think he just seemed to be a much more believable everyman character compared to some of the other Marvel everymen. For example, like Paul Rudd and Ant-Man. Kind of, I think there's a quality about Liu Simu that doesn't come across in many of these other leading men. And I know there's a lot of criticism of the actual character of Shang-Chi to be pretty one note, how all the side characters like Awkwafina and his dad, and they're all more interesting than him. And I think that's true, but I think it gives him short shrift as well, because he does a really, really good job in grounding everything. And I really felt that throughout the movie.
Yeah, I think for him to have been an Iron Man jokey type, and I adore Robert Downey Jr. and I love him as Iron Man, and I really like the twinkle in his eye with everything that he says. But I hear you, William. I think that I think it was appropriate in a way. I mean, I didn't love the Shang-Chi character or performance particularly because it didn't have that sort of that panache or quite that twinkle in the eye. But I do hear you. I think it was. I think he definitely carries himself, the actor carries himself with a real confidence that isn't arrogance for taking on such a major role. But I agree with everything you say, Jeremy, about their the charms of the two of them together, and Awkwafina can do no wrong for me. I really love her. What?
Can we also talk about Hero, because that film is, at least in my memory, spectacular. I think I saw that film when I was 17 or 16 years old with my mum. We went to the film festival in Nelson, the Studer Art Gallery Theatre, and I remember seeing the trailer and thinking, this looks amazing. I think Kill Bill was coming out, and this film was around about the same time. Tarantino had endorsed it, and it was just an absolute joy. And I had never seen Rashomon, which is the film that I guess it's harking back to, the same event told from different perspectives. And so that narrative style was really impressive to me. I hadn't seen Jackie Brown. Tarantino kind of does that in Jackie Brown as well, where you get the same event told multiple times. And just visually, I hadn't seen The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, which does the changing colors, which Hero does as well. So that film did a lot of very impressive stylistic and storytelling things that I hadn't experienced in other spaces. And I remember the performances of each of the actors being really poignant, and again those stoic faces holding so much emotion and story. And heartbreak. It's a really spectacular movie.
I think it was the second film directly on the heels of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that used that wonderful wire work to such great effect in the martial arts scenes. And I noticed that in Shang-Chi there was a little bit of wire work, or at least it certainly looked like it in the movement, particularly when Shang-Chi is fighting Michelle Yeoh's character, when he's sort of doing his training, which was actually quite beautiful and would have been nicer on a bigger screen, I think. So yes, I can't wait for us to talk about the color theory stuff, because Hero, was
I guess you mean wire work in mainstream Western cinema, because it's a it's a long tradition, and
or at least crossover cinema, right? Because that's right. So
I love the wire work in Shang-Chi. I think looking at a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, it becomes very, very obvious how much the stunt coordinators and the choreographers were involved with the making of the movie. I think Marvel also gets a lot of bad rap sometimes with the use of previs, directors like Chloé, Zhao, and even like Taika Waititi coming in to say that they don't actually get to direct a lot of the action scenes because they're already pre-prepared for them, right? But the previs work and the stunt choreography in Shang-Chi, I think it really harkens back to, Chinese and Hong Kong cinema of the 1970s. And like it feels different from other Marvel action scenes. It feels more cohesive, more coherent, and more physical, because it is done by, a lot of the same stunt teams that worked with Jackie Chan, that worked with Yuan He-ping. And you can feel that on screen. Now, I think the CGI often obscures a lot of the really cool stuff. But even with that, like the bus, I could not believe how much of that bus scene was actually physically real.
Yeah, right.
You see the behind the scenes making of, it's like, holy cow, like, it's CG flourishes, but almost every single leap and every single camera move was not a digital thing. Like it was wire work, old fashioned wire work, which is awesome.
I found a connection with the James Bond movie from 1986 called A View to a Kill, the one with Christopher Walken as a baddie and Grace Jones in it. And there's a fantastic scene in that. And look, we're going way back to the 80s, guys, and it's Roger Moore and who cares? However, there's a scene in San Francisco, probably on the same street that Awkwafina then drives the bus down, where the Bond girl is in the front seat of a fire truck, and Bond is busily trying to fight off baddies and swing from a ladder as they go careering down the street in San Francisco. And I was like, oh my gosh, Shang-Chi clearly used this as a reference. And there's even a bit where he says, turn, and not that way, the other way, and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh my God, it's the same. So there you go. A View to a Kill, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh gosh, that's the one where Roger Moore is like 3 times the age of the Bond girl, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Hey, well, let's talk about color theory. Because the colors in Hero are a big part of the narrative, and how it changes not just the color visually, but the color of the emotion of the story. But Sarah, you were quite enamored by the colors, and I was as well, in The Mood for Love. Do you want to speak to what stood out for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly the green literally stood out. There were so many, virtually every shot, whether it's a jadeite cup and saucer or a lamp or the beautiful dresses. And I mean, we could do a whole podcast on Maggie Cheung's.
Holy moly, those dresses.
Those, how do you say it? Is it Chung Song? Chung Song?
No, it's Qipao.
Ah, the most exquisite frocks. And of course, there were two cinematographers on In the Mood for Love. One of them is Christopher Doyle, who is an off-the-chain kind of long-time collaborator of Wong Kar-wai. What were you going to say about him, William?
I was going to say he was also cinematographer on Hero, so he brought a lot of that color theory stuff with him.
And he does a lot of Wong Kar-wai stuff and a lot of everybody's stuff. And so much. I said to my husband, there's a lot of male gaze here as well, also because there's a lot of camera shots that glide over Maggie's bottom, and then and actually, almost an equal amount of Tony Leung's bottom, I noticed. But the colors, all right. So lots and lots of red, which obviously evokes passion and whether it's angry passion or love passion. And red also being it's a wedding dress color, isn't it? In China and Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. But the green really, really stood out for me. There was exquisite green wallpaper behind, I think it was the boss in his office. And Shang-Chi, when everybody's dressing in hot pink to fight the baddies. And I thought, okay, I hadn't thought about hot pink as being like particularly a color theory sort of color. But all very startling and just gorgeous. I loved it.
One thing about the colors as well, I think they contrast so beautifully with a lot of the starkness of the movie.
Which one?
In The Mood for Love, right? Because so much of the movie is also set in front of backdrops of gray and concrete, and the dilapidated insides of very, very narrow passageways in old Hong Kong apartments. And so many scenes in the rain, and down darkened alleyways leading to noodle carts. And then when you have these bursts of color, like the hotel that Tony Leung is staying at, and the beautiful red drapes kind of billowing in the wind, it's just so gorgeous. And coupled with I guess also it really surprised me how Maggie Cheung's Qipao, it wasn't just a aesthetic thing. Like, they use that to great storytelling effect as well. Like, it is one thing to show her being beautiful, but another thing to use her wardrobe as a way of telling passage of time, and montages. And I think how this movie dealt with time in cinema, you so very, very rarely see outside of, I guess, French New Wave. Like, it felt very, very French to me. Yes. And of course, like Wang Jiawei had a lot of French influence in the cinema anyway. But like the whole thing being basically built up from a series of prolonged montages, and sometimes you don't know how much time has elapsed between certain scenes. There was one scene where I literally thought the copy I was watching had skipped a reel, and I was watching the same scene over again. It was like, it started buffering again. But of course, it's the same location with two completely different contexts. And how they use this kind of staccato passage of time and how they link it to their burgeoning feelings for each other was such I guess a masterstroke of filmmaking to me. Just the editing is brilliant.
Nice. Hey, well, Tim, let's do our final thoughts. Let's wrap this up. So, Sarah, do you want to jump in with your final thoughts about either film or both films?
Thank you. Yes, Jeremy, I should like to share some opinions. I, as you know, I'm a little bit fatigued by Marvel after Marvel after Marvel. And you guys very generously say you're excited about Chloé Zhao's Eternal, although there is a part of me that feels that to see a Marvel movie directed by a woman, and the first Asian woman at that, would be an important thing to do. But it doesn't really excite me greatly. And as I've said, there's a sadness for me that I didn't get to see Shang-Chi and the 10 bracelets in a huge cinema, because I do think it would have been a more thrilling experience had I done so. However, really happy with the individual performances of just about everybody. But In the Mood for Love, Princess of Shang-Chi in terms of there are no massive fight scenes, hardly anybody raises his or her voice. Do you know what I mean? There's no sex. I mean, neither film has sex, but what I mean is it's a love story that doesn't go there and stuff. How extraordinary. It repeats that most exquisite Japanese composed piece of music throughout In the Mood for Love, which has become iconic in and of itself. And yet every time it played, I didn't go, oh, not this again, you know, just absolutely captivating and enthralling, to use two words. And really, I think I felt really thrilled that it had been probably a couple of decades actually since I had seen In the Mood for Love, and that it had held up and just feels timeless in terms of a canon of cinema, in a way that obviously I know that it's an unfair comparison. This is apples with not apples, but I don't think Shang-Chi will, you know.
Apples and cheeseburgers.
There you go. So yes.
Excellent, thank you. William, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, In the Mood for Love, I am really, really happy we picked this movie as a comparison for Shang-Chi, because I've been wanting to see this for the longest time, just hearing people's thoughts on this and seeing the retrospectives. And I think it was voted number 2 movie of all time in a BBC poll, which is like, whoa. But it really is a masterpiece. I think it runs the risk sometimes of being a little pretentious, but I mean, Wang Xiaowei's films are, you know, very pretentious, but I don't think in a bad way. It's beautifully shot. The editing is just incredible. The acting is so good. I agree about the music, Sarah. Like, that repeated motif is just, it's heartbreaking and uplifting in equal measure, and it's great. It's great how it does that. And yeah, it's just, I think, completely deserving of all of the accolades that it's been receiving over the last 2 decades. Shang-Chi, I would say, apart from the ending, which I really didn't like, I think it resorts to that Marvel messy CGI combat, all these armies on screen doing nothing. Apart from that, everything else, I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. One thing we haven't really brought up is the cultural capital of Shang-Chi. And it's awesome. I think it blew me away that maybe about 40%, if not more, of the dialogue is in subtitled Mandarin. Like, what movie does this? What blockbuster film made in Hollywood does this?
Yeah, brilliant.
And it wasn't, to me, it didn't feel pandering like it did in movies like Mulan, where, you know, the whole tone was just off. This feels natural. And I love that both of you brought up The Farewell with Awkwafina as well, because one thing I didn't like about The Farewell was how much it needed to explain everything to Western audiences, where this movie does not. And it never does. And you just live with the reality that these characters live in, and the fact that they are, you know, of Chinese descent, and a lot of the stuff involves Chinese culture, felt really, really genuine in a way that I was so happy to see in a Hollywood blockbuster. Action is really cool. I think the acting is solid. And yeah, Tony Leung, you just get lost in that man's eyes. I think he is amazing.
I love it. Well, I agree actually with everything you both said. I had a good time with Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings, you know, on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon, whatever it was, on a reasonably large television and a good sound system. It's these Marvel movies, you know, I don't ever really go back and rewatch them unless it's Thor Ragnarok, which I love. So I was happy but I agree with all your criticisms about the film. And Awkwafina, like you say, Sarah, I think she can do no wrong. She's a wonderful presence on the screen, and I'd like to see her get more leads, like in The Farewell, because I think it does something to her energy. You know, she isn't able to just be the quippy side character, and is able to bring a lot more heart to the screen. I really enjoyed it. And In the Mood for Love, I had a great time. It really reminded me of Cabaret as well, actually. The scenes in this sort of collective living environment was very reminiscent of Cabaret. I really enjoyed the colors. I enjoyed the use of the play with time that you mentioned, William, and I enjoyed a lot of elements about it. I did find a little, like, you know, the male gaze you mentioned, Sarah. I also would say it was a little bit misogynistic in the way that the female character is depicted. You know, she cries a lot, and it's a little bit like, oh gosh, okay. But apart from that, my only other major criticism is the ending. I just think, it's like they're like, oh, we don't know how to end this. Let's just go to Cambodia and film Angkor Wat. And so I sort of, that for me, the endorsement of it being the second biggest movie of all time, I'm like, oh, it was definitely a movie of its time, like it feels a bit dated for the 2000s and 90s because of that. But everything else it brings to the table was an absolute joy to watch. And I agree. I'm really glad we paired it with this film, even though Hero seems like the more obvious choice. It's meant that we've stepped into, I guess, again, we've talked about this a lot, but we're not getting movies like In the Mood for Love at the moment. I guess, in some ways it's a classic, and so there's no movies like In the Mood for Love. But those films, we're getting them through the independent cinema, but some of the crossover is not happening. And I'd like to see, in some ways, comparing a Marvel movie to this type of movie feels appropriate as a contrast of the type of films we're getting. And on that note, dear listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context on SoundCloud, Spotify, Radio Public, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts. You can also subscribe to us and follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode and give us suggestions for future films to discuss and compare. Look out for our next episode in a month's time, which will be our wrap-up episode of 2021. And until then, no more mai.